as we broadcast live from the Smith Studio of Idea Center in Playhouse Square before a live studio audience. During the next hour, we plan to spotlight the 2016 TriC Jazz Fest happening here in Playhouse Square over the next 2 days and nights. There's already a party going on right outside our front door. But inside, joining me now to share more about the festival is one of the stars of it. He's also serving as this year's artist in residence. He's a master trumpet player, an innovative band leader and arranger, as well as a much-in-demand composer for films and a 5-time Grammy winner. If you're not in our studio today, you can watch our show live on your phones and computers via our webpage, applause.ideastream.org. Right now, though, ladies and gentlemen, in the Smith Studio, let's put our hands together and welcome New Orleans jazz master Terence Blanchard.
Hey, you got me. Hey, how you doing, dude?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Sure.
And I want to mention that you brought a bunch of friends and colleagues with you here today, the E Collective, and I'd like to have you share the story behind this new group.
Well, it originally started with our original drummer, he couldn't be with us this weekend, Oscar Seaton. We did a film together a number of years ago called Inside Man with Spike. No. And we did a lot of groove-based music for the score, and we had so much fun doing it. We said, man, we should put together a band. But, you know, he's busy, plays with Lionel Richie. I was doing my thing. Took us a while to actually get to the point where we could find time to do it. And then we both just basically said, we just got to make the time to do it. So last year, we just put the band together and went out on the road with 2 days of rehearsal, not really knowing what was going to happen. And we just said, let's just figure this out. And, we enlisted the help of these great musicians like Fabian Almazan on piano, Charles Altura back here on guitar. And then later, now we got this guy, head DJ on bass. Yeah. And filling in for Oscar is Joe Blacks on drums.
Good to have you all here, fellas. Thank you.
And the original idea behind the band was really to put together a group that would play groove-based music and inspire some young kids to play some music on a high level if they weren't necessarily jazz musicians. But then as we were on tour, man, life was happening back in the States. You know, there was all of these shootings going on, and a lot of young men were losing their lives at the hands of law enforcement. And then all of a sudden it became very apparent that we should do something else with this music. So we decided to kind of make our own statement about what we felt was going on. And that's the reason why we call the album Breathless, you know, and all of the music is, it's inspired by the I Can't Breathe and Black Lives Matter campaign.
Right. And a lot of that is captured in vocals and spoken word, but it's also in the structure of the music, and I'd love to show some of that off. What's the first song you'll do for us here in the studio, and how does it relate to what you just said?
Well, you know, it's so interesting. One of the things when I think about the commentary that I would hear about a lot of these shootings, it was as if people have a preconceived notion about what an African-American male is just by the sight of him, you know. And I've had so many experiences in my career where when I've talked to people who don't know me, they've met me for the first time and they don't have a clue who I am or what I do, you could see their minds change about me as we're talking in conversation. And it's one of the things that never gets talked about, but I'd be willing to bet a lot of people have experienced that at some point. So this first song that we're going to play for you today, it's simply called See Me As I Am.
Let's hear it. Wow. Terence Blanchard and his E-Collective performing live in the Idea Center's Smith Studio. Saturday afternoon at 3, he performs here in Playhouse Square at the Ohio Theater for the 2016 TriC Jazz Fest. And right now, even if you're not in the studio, you can see Terence and his E-Collective via our live web stream online at applause.ideastream.org. And it was beautifully apparent in that song, the things that you were talking about. I could hear the voices, I could hear the yearning and the pain and the conversation that needs to go on.
Well, that's the idea behind it. I mean, it's a frustrating thing. I had this, well, let me back up. I had this experience with a friend of mine who was my mentor in the film business one time. And we were talking about how, I was just telling him how I feel when I go into some of these meetings. And we actually worked on a project together. And we went to the meeting together. And he said something that was really interesting. He said, man, I see what you're saying. I see how people are responding to you. And it's interesting because these are people that I know. And, it takes them a while to warm up to you because it seems as though they're coming to you with a certain type of, not aggression, but a certain type of wall. And then when they start to realize who you really are, then things start to change. And I said, yeah, you get accustomed to that, but you just get tired of it too at the same time. So that's the whole idea behind it. Just see me as I am the first time. Try not to come to me with any preconceived notions about who I am.
Yeah. I wonder if that's something that you can translate into musical lessons with students like the ones you've been working with for TriC Jazz Fest or anywhere as a jazz educator.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because normally when we play that particular tune, we started off with a moment of reflection from Dr. Cornel West, where at the end of it he says, "Go on, brother, just be who you want, just be who you are." You know what I mean? And that's really what we try to teach, in jazz education. Because it's one thing, you need to study the history, you need to know your fundamentals and all of that stuff. That's apparent, that's a given. But at the end of the day, what really needs to happen is for people to be honest about what it is that they're feeling and try to translate that into their own compositions. Because those are the things that are going to touch other people. When you're honest about what it is that you're feeling, because we're all in this thing together. And that's what some people seem not to realize. But as a human race, we've been all been in this together for centuries, And the thing that's always interesting about it to me is that everybody has a different way of communicating that yearning and pain, and that's what I find beautiful in art, And it's not just jazz, but it could be in writing, it could be in painting, or anything. There's that yearning to be one with other folks, even though you're different than me and you may have different views. To me, that's the beauty of the human race, is to celebrate our differences and not try to be afraid of them.
To be seen and heard.
Yes.
Not necessarily, no one needs to be all the same, but if we can extend each other the courtesy of saying, I see you for who you are.
Exactly, and I can appreciate your thinking. I may not agree with it, but I could definitely see the logic in it and I can appreciate it.
Before we take a break, I'm wondering about the fact that you're surrounded by young players, not that you are not a young man still.
That's all right. That's all right.
I see you.
I saw you setting that up. That's okay.
But is there a different relationship because of the difference in your ages or experience, or do you see all of the players who are with you now as equals?
I try not to think of it that way. I mean, Oscar, a normal drummer, he's close to my age, and one of the original members was actually a little older than me. And so I try not to think of it that way. What I think of it, I try to look at it as what people are bringing to the stage. The thing that I love about these guys is that they all have a different way of thinking about creating music, And, I used to make a joke about the band. I used to say, we're like the 5 most unlikely dudes you'll ever see together. Like, if you ever see us, hanging out, you'll never put us on the same stage, Right. But I think that's part of the idea behind, what a true democracy is supposed to be. I can't think the way that he thinks, and what he brings to the stage and brings to the music is opening my eyes to something. I tell my students all the time, one of the things that I love about being a jazz musician is that, you may have a preconceived notion about what the music's going to be, but as soon as you hit the bandstand, you got 4 other brains and hearts and souls up here that are contributing. So you may think of something, but this guy may play something and you go, oh, wow, I haven't thought of that. Okay, well, let's go down that road then. And that's what all of these guys bring, and that's what I'm looking for when, we're hiring musicians. There are a lot of guys out there that can play and be functional and make the gig, but it's what are you bringing to the gig that's the most important.
Yeah, and they bring a lot, as we've heard here already. We're going to get a chance to bring some more, but first I need to take a short break. I'm here with Terence Blanchard and his E-Collective, who perform tomorrow afternoon at the Ohio Theater for the 2016 TriC Jazz Fest. You can see us, if you're not in the studio, via the webcam online at applause.ideastream.org and on your phones and computers. We'll take that break and come back with more from Terence and his crew as you stay tuned to this Sound of Applause special on 90.3 WCPN Idea Stream. What happens during that? Welcome back to this special TriC Jazz Fest edition of the Sound of Applause as we broadcast live from the Idea Center's Smith Studio in front of a live audience. Now, the TriC Jazz Festival is in full swing here in Playhouse Square. You may be able to hear some of the thumping right through our studio windows as we're facing out on Playhouse Square. I know. But here in the studio, we're not too doing shabby either with Terence Blanchard and the E-Collective, and we are going to hear more from them in just a minute. You can watch us, even if you're not in the studio, via your phone or computer at applause.ideastream.org. And Terence, before the break, we were talking about passing your passion for jazz on to the next generation, and that's what you've been doing as artist in residence at TriC Jazz Fest. What are some of the ways that you do that during the time that you're here?
Well, I mean, we try to have an engagement with the students where I really believe, and this comes from my days with Art Blakey. Art Blakey used to always tell us, you find yourself through composition. Because when you have to compose, you have to commit your musical ideas to paper, right? So I'm a firm believer in that. So, when Terry asked me to come here and do this, the first thing that I said was I wanted to work with these kids and work on their composition skills. And that's what I've been doing. So, some of them are a little nervous at first, but the thing that's always interesting about it, when you just give them some tools to create and develop their ideas, it's always amazing what they come up with, because the ideas are never the issue. It's never the issue with the young kids. They have ideas that are just coming out of their pores, 24/7. It's what do you do with them and how do you develop them? How do you take them further? You know what I mean? One of the things that I always try to tell kids is I'll play, one of my favorite pieces to play for them is Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, because I always tell them, I said, listen, man, this is based on Hungarian folk music. Right, but look at what he did with that simple little line and blew it up into something else. And there's some other things that I'll show them as well. But having them immersed in that makes them commit their ideas and makes them really kind of flush them out, because one of the things that I've learned is sometimes you could always have an idea of what a rhythm is, you can have an idea of what a harmonic progression is, but if you're never writing it down on paper, you're never really seeing it in its concrete form. And when you see it down, you go, oh, okay. And now, with the tools that I have, I see what I could take this and shift this here and then make it a little different here, and then move this around and create a bigger piece.
And I wonder how that connects with one of the centerpieces of jazz, improvisation.
Well, it's the same thing. You know, it's actually the same. You know, improvisation is composition, you know, not regurgitation. Because one of the things that I try to stress is that I know it's very easy. Alvin Baptiste, who's a great clarinetist and great jazz educator in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, told me one time, and it struck me and it hit me really hard. He said, man, you know, he said the easiest thing in the world to do is to play like John Coltrane. And I went, really? But I got what he was saying. He said, you know, because when you play like John Coltrane, everybody loves John Coltrane, and you know inadvertently they're going to love you. So he said, but the hardest thing to do is to really develop something that's uniquely yours and to present it to the world for there possibly to be some type of rejection. And for some people, that fear is daunting, and it could really inhibit your creativity. So for me, the compositional thing is just the basis of where improvisation goes, right? To really try to find what is your rhythm. I'll give you an example. Okay, so I was in Brazil a number of years ago, and we were playing in front of Illinois Jacquette's band one night. But the night before, they had the Cedar Walton Trio and they had the McCoy Tyner Trio, 2 piano trios. And I dug them both. And the reason why I dug them both, because they were just being themselves and being who they are. Stylistically, 2 totally different approaches, but it was really beautiful to see. And then the next night, when I saw Illinois get up and play, man, he played behind us and brought the house down. And when I listened to him play, I went, wow, okay. See, he's not trying to imitate anybody else. He's just being who he is. So the next question for me was, what are those rhythms for me? What are those melodies for me? What are those harmonies for me? And that there is the crux of anybody's artistic search and endeavor throughout their career. That's the thing. Those are the questions you should be trying to tackle.
And that's a great segue for the next thing that you're going to play. We'll see how you tackle it in something called Confident Selflessness. And how does that fit in with the breathless theme?
Well, you know, it's really a Buddhist thing. I became a Buddhist a number of years ago, and it's really about having the confidence to just be yourself, but to be selfless in your actions and really try to find a way to bring a healing nature to anything or anybody you encounter.
I love it.
Okay,
Let's
thank you.
hear it. Outstanding. An excellent depiction of confident selflessness. I'm here with Terence Blanchard and his E-Collective, who perform tomorrow afternoon at the Ohio Theater for the 2016 TriC Jazz Fest. You can see us via webcam online at applause.ideastream.org. We'll take one more break and then come back with more from Terence and the crew as you stay tuned to this Sound of Applause special on 90.3 WCPN Idea Stream.
Vodka soda? I'm just kidding. I said that for Terry. She didn't hear me. You ain't hear me, huh? He asked if anybody wanted water. I said vodka soda. Maybe a little lemonade. I got to tell you a funny story. Remind me to tell you a funny story about Tremaine.
Okay.
Stand by.
And welcome back to a special TriC Jazz Fest edition of the Sound of Applause with Terence Blanchard and his E-Collective here on 90.3. Now, tomorrow afternoon, Terence and the band will take the stage of the Ohio Theater here in Playhouse Square to play for the TriC Jazz Fest, at which Terence is this year's artist in residence. And if you'd like to watch the rest of our show here in Idea Center's Smith Studio, you can do that even if you're not here by logging on to our webcam, applause.ideastream.org. And Terence, in this hour, we've been hearing songs from your latest album, Breathless, and at tomorrow's Jazz Fest concert, you and the band will be playing more of that music.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about it earlier in the hour, but I wanted to get more of a sense of why you wanted to present that aspect of yourself and your music. I mean, you've been known for a certain kind of playing for years.
Yes. Well, I think it's like anything, in the world of art. This is just kind of where I am right now, artistically and musically. And we've been having a lot of fun playing, I look forward to seeing what's going to happen with this group in the future. A lot of people have been asking me about the band. I said, well, man, what is it? And we all say, we don't know.
But that's exciting.
It is. It's nerve-wracking because you wish you could have a little more of a concrete idea, but we really don't know. But that's cool because it's constantly evolving, We even have some new music that we're not going to play tomorrow night, but we have some music that we're working on for the next project, and it's very different from the first
album.
album.
What's on this album?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
But I got to say, when I heard the first couple of tracks on Breathless, it took me back for a minute to Miles Davis and the fusion that he was doing in the 70s and the 80s, and really right up until the time that he passed in 1991. And by that I mean fusing jazz with more contemporary, whatever the contemporary sounds were.
Sure.
And that made me wonder if, when you were growing up, if Miles was a reference point for you.
Definitely. I mean, the first time I met Miles, he was playing with his electric band in Italy, and Al Foster was the drummer, and Al could see that he knew Miles was my hero, so he could see that I never met him, and he says, he brought me in to meet him. As soon as I walked in, Miles looked at me and goes, Terence. And it was a cool thing because one of the things that I've always admired about Miles is that, love him or hate him, he always moved forward. He always tried to do something different. He never really went back until, later on when he did that concert in Europe, the Jazz Festival there. But for the most part, he's always trying to find new things. And I've had this similar experiences with Herbie and Wayne. I was on tour with Herbie, and we were on tour for about 10 weeks, and we were playing some new arrangements of some older tunes, like Speak Like a Child. And I remember at one of the sound checks, he went and played the the older version from the Blue Note records, and Kendrick Scott was on drums, and James Genius was playing bass. And when he started to play the old version, they jumped up on the instruments real quick, you know, because they're like, yeah, this is it. I'm playing with Herbie, you know. And we were sitting on the side listening, go, ooh, that's killing, it's killing, woo, it's great. And then Herbie, he wasn't paying attention, he was just playing, you know. And then when he just stopped and he said, man, it just feels so old to me. Mm-hmm. And we were like, yeah.
What you said?
Yeah, that's right. but it was a lesson for us, you know what I mean? Because we look at it as classic music, which it is, you know, and it's timeless, you know. But for him, the creator of it, he's still pushing forward, and he's still trying to find new avenues.
Don't pull me back. I
exactly.
Need to get, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we're gonna push you forward with another song.
Okay.
What's the next one? Soldiers.
Yeah. One of the things when I started thinking about this whole issue, law enforcement and our youth, I started thinking about a lot of people that I know who do social work, you know, and then I thought of our president and all of the social work that he did, you know, as a young man. And a lot of those folks that I know who do that are very committed. They're very committed to their communities, and it's like a thankless job because nobody knows who they are, you know, and they do all of this work trying to better other people's lives. So I wrote this tune for them. It's simply called Soldiers.
Let's hear it.
1, 2.
Wow. Say their names, say their names.
Fabian Almazan on piano, DJ at the bass, Joe Blacks at the drums, Charles Altura, the guitar.
The E Collective and Terence Blanchard on trumpet. It has been such a gift to have you in the studio with
thank
us
you.
today. I love to watch you work, and with this band, it's a different aspect, as we were talking about. And I wonder about the technology aspect of it, if you're learning as much as you're teaching.
Both. Yeah, because the interesting thing about it, it started with the film career. You know, I started using a lot of different sounds and a lot of different effects on my horn. And I thought, why not bring that into what I'm doing in live performance? And then that dude over there on
And
the
you're pointing
keyboards,
to?
Fabian, he's like the mad scientist. You know, he's always over there tinkering. If you notice, he never keeps still. He's actually formulated a program for his laptop where he can control so many different things in live performance, and it's always different. So we're constantly learning. And then this guy behind me, Charles, you know, he's whittled it down now. He used to have a lot of pedals, but he's like brought it down to 3, and he's still getting a lot of great sounds out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole collective is just a great sound. I can't wait to hear what you do next.
We can't either.
Thank you so much for sharing it with us in the studio today. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
Now, I remind you that Terence Blanchard and the E Collective will be in concert this Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. as they spotlight their new album, Breathless, here at Playhouse Square inside the Ohio Theater for the 2016 TriC Jazz Fest. That festival is already underway now outside the Idea Center at East 14th and Euclid. And if you missed any of today's show or you just want to experience it again, you can do that online at applause.ideastream.org. Meanwhile, thanks today to our sound engineers Al Dahlhausen, Lawrence Caswell, Tom Smeagol, and Drew Macias. Our technical producer today for the studio downstairs was Steve Dole, and we had production assistance from Dan Paletta. Our TV crew, Mike Vendelin, Dave Starch, and Milan Jovanovic. Today's show was produced by Dave Diorio, and Sound of Applause executive producer is Mark Rosenberger. I'm Dee Perry, inviting you to stay tuned to 90.3 WCPN Idea Stream, where Science Friday is next, and have a great Jazz Fest weekend. Could we get a little traveling music, Terence?
Yes.
Thank you.